Hello, welcome to RC Video Reviews. I recently posted a video showing how to create a 54 position switch matrix, and right after I posted that video, one of our regular subscribers and contributors popped in and said, "Hey, I have a question for you. Can you show us how to set up a logical switch that plays a track that only pre-announces what a switch will do before you actually actuate the switch?" And that's a great question because in the course of making the last video, I said near the end, this is really a thought exercise just to demonstrate the logic and how the logic works, because once you understand that, then you can do anything. And Jim popped in and he said, "Hey, that's awesome that you can do that much with the radio, but how are we supposed to remember that?" And I agree. How are you supposed to remember that? I don't know anybody that would be able to fly an RC plane and allow me to stand on the side and say, "Hey, execute action 44, and then have them navigate to that position on the radio and then execute it and know exactly what it's going to do. That would be a complex thing. You'd have to have a strong memory for something like that. So Jim's idea is interesting in that we can use techniques in the radio to help us identify what a switch will do before it does it. And I came up with two approaches to this. The first one is what I'll call a more simple approach with a switch. You just use a switch, and we can take advantage of the idea that most functions we perform are binary. They're either on or off. And we have a whole bunch of 3-position switches, which means we have one extra step in addition to the on or off. The first method I'm going to show you is the switch method, and that can be completely configured inside of special functions. So notice we're all the way down here on SF21. The order doesn't matter. You can use whatever order you want. And I've identified SA is our action switch. And you can see that I've got a couple of special functions defined. I've got SA up twice, SA mid twice, SA down twice, and then down here I've got a couple of overrides. So let's go through what these do. The SA up position says launch mode is off, and that's really more for when you've used launch mode, right? So if you've already actuated launch mode and turned it off, you want an announcement saying that it's off. And you'll notice over on the side, it says played once, not during startup. In this version of OpenTx Companion, it seems like that function is ignored. So when I go in the simulator, you will hear this launch mode off. It's just a bug in the software. I have confirmed in the radio, it does not do the same thing. So go ahead and set played once, not during startup. And in the radio, that looks like an exclamation 1X, okay? And the other ones we'll just set to no repeat. So we've got no repeat for everything else. All right, SA mid is where we're going to actually announce that we're using the launch mode. This is the warning that Jim asked for. He said, "Hey, what's the switch going to do?" So when I put SA in the middle position, it's going to play the track launch mode, and it's also going to play the track launch mode armed. So it'll do these back to back. It's chaining play tracks together, okay? And SA down is the last step in the sequence, and when we move SA to the down position, the radio is going to play launch mode on. And then also notice in special functions 28 and 29, there's an action taken when SA is down. The first action is that we're going to override the elevator and we're going to set the value to 50. And you can use whatever value you want. I'm doing 50 just for illustrative purposes and to show you in the outputs that some change occurred. So you might need 50, you might want 20, you might want 100, it doesn't matter. 50 is not material here, it's just a demonstration. And then with SA down, I'm setting the throttle to 75. Again, you might choose 50, you might choose 0. You know, this is just an example. So let's take a look at the simulator and see what this does.
Attitude mode off, launch mode off.
Okay, remember what I said, ignore the early prompts. When you're in the radio, it shouldn't do that if you use that repeat once, not during startup. SA is up right now, and you notice I have no logical switches activated because we're not using any. The thing I'll draw your attention to is the elevator. In my case, that's on channel 2, and my throttle, okay? My throttle right now is 0, and my elevator is neutral. So when I put SA in the middle position, we'll get a prompt saying that we're armed for launch mode.
Launch mode armed.
Okay, simple prompt, but nothing happened. All right, so this kind of addresses Jim's question that says, "Hey, can we get a warning first?" There's your warning. When we move SA to the down position, watch what happens over here with channel 2 and channel 3. We should see them both increase based on the movement of this switch.
Launch mode on.
Okay, you see how the elevator on channel 2 went up to 50 and the throttle went up to 75%. And notice my timer also started. So now we're in launch mode and you can chuck the plane. Okay, so that's one example, and that's a very simple switch method example. Now let's do something a little more complex. Before I get into the logic method, I want to invite you to hit that subscribe button if you like this type of content. For small channels like mine, your subscription does matter because growth helps our videos get placement on YouTube. A full 62% of viewers on RC video reviews don't subscribe. If every one of those people were to hit the subscribe button, the channel would more than double overnight. Also, don't forget to check out my affiliate links for Amazon and Banggood, and I've got a t-shirt store, so if you want a cool RC video reviews t-shirt, you can get them at my store. All right, let's get on with the logic method. The first step is to create an input. By creating an input, we can assign a name, and we can use that information through the mixer and the output, and we can collectively modify those inputs in the input channel if we need to. The second thing we'll do is assign those inputs to a channel in the mixer. That's how we connect the input or the logical switch to a physical channel on your receiver. Number 3, we've got to create logical switches, and there are 2 tasks we need to accomplish in logical switches. Number 1, we've got to define our matrix, and number 2, we have to create a trigger. Finally, in step number 4, for special functions, we'll create our alerts and the actions that go along with what we created in our logical switch matrix. Okay, let's start with the inputs. On the Inputs tab, I created 2 inputs, one on 6, which is typical for mode switches on flight computers. I'm not sure why, but 6 seems to be the channel out there to select your mode for a flight controller. So I just made one input and named it mode and gave it a line name of FL mode, and I assigned L12. Your logical switch number may vary depending on your configuration. This is how it worked out for mine. And that's it. No other modifiers in that dialog. And the same thing for the bomb release. I created a bomb release on input number 8. I assigned it a logical switch number 11 and no other modifiers. That's it. It just source is logical 11. And then in the mixer, I assigned that mode input to channel number 6, no other modifiers. And I assigned my bomb release input to channel number 8. No other modifiers. That's all I've done. Okay, so that covers steps 1 and 2. We created our inputs and we assigned those inputs to a channel in the mixer. Now we're on to step number 3, and this one takes a little bit more work. If you look back on the first video where I created the matrix, you'll recognize this immediately. So we've got L1 all the way through L9, and I'm using switch SC and SD. So we start with SC up and SD up, and then we cycle through all of those positions or combinations, and we wind up with SC down and SD down. So no changes there. That's the same exact matrix that we created in the last video. You might want to pause the video here if you're trying to follow along in Companion so that you can replicate what you see here in your setup. I'll also point out that you don't need to use this entire matrix. You could just go with 6 positions. You could just go with 3 positions. You might decide you want all 9. The next thing, L10, I'm going to call L10 here the trigger. And the reason I'm going to call it the trigger is because you'll notice it's a sticky switch and we're using the trim 6 button. So I have got trim 6 up and trim 6 down, and it's a sticky. Now the way this is going to work is when trim 6 is pressed up, L10 will illuminate. And because I set a duration of 3 seconds, it will only stay illuminated for 3 seconds. Really, it's kind of like an edge switch, but you can add a duration and make it perform like a momentary switch. And the reason I'm going to do it this way is to keep it real simple. I'm going to show you that we can use L10 as a momentary trigger, or we can use it as a binary, either on or off. So we'll start with the momentary configuration first. So just go ahead and create, for some logical switch number, I use 10. Create a sticky, call it 6 up and 6 down, and add a duration of 3 seconds. And remember, the duration makes it a momentary switch, okay? Now for L11, 12, and 13, here's where I'm using the same concepts I used in the 54 position switch matrix. We're gonna look at L02, which says when SC is up and SD is in the middle, that is L02. So L02 will illuminate when SC is up and SD is in the middle. And then L11 will illuminate when L10 is true. L10 is our sticky, which is trim 6 up. This is our trigger. L12 says when L3 is active, L3 is SC up and SD down, then go ahead and activate when the trigger is activated. And then L13 is L4 and L10. L4 says when SC is in the middle and SD is up, then L4 goes live, and then our trigger L10 will activate this one. All right, that covers step number 3, logical switches. We've identified our matrix and we created our trigger in L10. So now let's move on to special functions and see what needs to be done in there. In the special functions tab, I've broken everything up into groupings. So SF1 through 3 are concerned with the bomb release audio prompts. So notice that we've got L02 for the first 2 special functions. And when L02 is illuminated, the radio will say bomb release armed. And remember, for logical switch 2, that occurs when SC is in the up position and SD is in the middle position. So in that case, we get a bomb release armed. And then when L11 goes illuminated, we play another track that says bomb release. Remember, L11 is the AND condition of L2 and the trigger, okay? So when L2, that means it's armed, and then we pull the trigger, we'll get an audio prompt saying bombs released. For the attitude mode, this is just a flight mode. I used attitude mode. You could use any other mode you want. I just use this one. It doesn't matter which one. Notice that I've got L03 playing the tracks attitude mode armed. So when SC is up and SD is down, the radio is going to play a track that says attitude mode armed. That's the notification. It hasn't actually occurred yet. It doesn't occur until the trigger. That occurs when we hit L12. Remember, L12 says when L03 is active and the trigger is pulled, that's when we execute. So when we execute, the radio will report attitude mode on. And then when L12 is not active, the radio will report attitude mode is off. So this is a binary arrangement. SF5 through SF10 identify a binary either on or off scenario. This is not a momentary setup. When you put the plane in attitude mode, you want it to stay in attitude mode until you turn it off. Okay, the last grouping I have is a timer reset. So we've got SF12 through SF14, and those functions rely on logical 4 and logical 13. So if we look at logical 4 and 13, we can see that SC has to be in the middle and SD is up. And then 13 says L04 is active and our trigger is pulled. When that happens, we're going to reset our timer. This is a momentary function. So we've got a momentary set of functions with SF1, SF2, and SF3. And we've got some momentary functions with SF12, 13, and 14. And then for the binary function, we're using SF5 through SF10. That's the attitude mode. And then the last thing I'll show are the actions that take place when these things occur. When L11 is active, which is the bomb release, we're going to override channel 8. Remember, channel 8 on our mixer is our bomb release, okay? So we're going to override channel 8 with a value of 100. And I'll show you that in the output screen. When L12 is active, that's our attitude mode. Remember, that's the binary, either on or off. When that's active, we're going to override channel 6 and set a value of 85. The reason I used 85 is because different flight computers use different values for the various modes. So I can't tell you if your flight computer is 85 or 66 or 22. You'll have to read your book and understand what that is. But the point is, I'm going to show you that when L12 goes active, we can send a certain configured value to the receiver. And then finally, when L13 is active, we're going to reset timer 1. Okay, we're going to take a look at how this looks in the simulator, but first we're going to focus on just the 2 momentary options, which are the bomb release and the timer reset. And then after that, we've got to make a change to our trigger, and then I'll do the binary option for you. So let's see what happens in the simulator. Okay, remember our trigger is T6, and that's configured for a momentary action. So we're going to execute our 2 momentary logical configurations. The first momentary configuration is the bomb release, and the second one is the timer reset. So let's do the bomb release first. And remember, bomb release is on channel 8. So notice over here on channel 8 that we have a value of -100. So now I'm going to arm my bomb release. The first step is to arm the switch. So we're going to arm it first.
Bombs released, armed.
Okay, notice that L2 is active. And the reason that we got that audio prompt is because when L2 goes active, we have a special function that says bomb release armed. So now we know our bomb release is armed. Now to execute the bomb release, all we've got to do is pull the trigger.
Bombs released.
See how channel 8 went to 100? There we go. And now it's back off. The reason it's back off is because that's a momentary operation. It goes off because we set a duration in the sticky switch, so it's off. So the momentary switch is now over, and whatever servo or mechanism you used would have been returned to its initial state. Okay, let's take a look at the logical switches for the timer reset. Remember, we're looking at logical 4 and logical 13. Logical 4 occurs when SC is in the middle position and SD is in the up position, and logical 13 occurs when logical 4 is lit and the trigger is pulled. The trigger in this case is still a momentary switch. That's what you want for a timer reset, just a momentary click. Let's bring up the simulator and take a look. Remember, logical 4 relies on SC being in the middle position, so let's activate that.
Timer reset armed.
Notice logical 4 is lit, and our special functions say when logical 4 is lit, play the track timer reset armed. So that's what just happened. Let's look at it again.
Timer reset armed.
Okay, so our timer reset is armed. Now the last thing we need is for logical 13 to illuminate, and the way we do that is by hitting our momentary switch.
Timer reset.
Let's run the timer so you can see it actually work this time. So I'll hit the trigger. We're still armed. I'll hit the trigger and watch the timer.
Timer reset.
Okay. Well, there you go. You just got an example on using a momentary trigger and using 2 switches out of the 9 switch matrix to have an announcement made prior to executing the action on that switch. Now let's go ahead and check out a binary operation, either on or off. What we have to do in that case is remove the duration. See how that duration right there says 3? We just take that out. Now what I've done by doing that is converted the sticky to a straight up on or off switch with trim 6 up and trim 6 down being the indicators. So when up is active, L10 will go on and stay on until down is active. I will suggest to you that if you want to use this technique in an actual model, that you separate out your momentary trigger from your binary trigger and put your binary functions on your binary trigger and put your momentary functions on your momentary trigger. And there are ways you can carve that up. You could say anything with SC middle is momentary and anything with SC down is binary. And the reason I suggest doing that is because you can't go into your configuration and change this back and forth while you're flying. So I'm just showing you the mechanics of how this works. Before we get into the simulator, let's recap what happens in our special functions for attitude mode. When L03 goes active, we'll conduct our announcement saying the attitude mode is armed. And then when L12 is activated, we're going to have an announcement that says attitude mode is on. And when logical 12 is not active, we're going to get a notification saying attitude mode is off. Also notice down here on SF17, when L12 is lit, we're going to override channel 6 with a value of 85. And remember that channel 6, we identified that as our mode channel in the mixer, okay? So that's assigned to channel 6. So pay attention in the simulator, look at channel 6 when we activate our attitude mode. Let's take a look at the simulator and see how this all works out. The first thing I want to show you is how T6 converted from a momentary trigger to a binary trigger. So watch logical switch 10 over here when I click T6 up. You see how logical 10 is illuminated and it's staying illuminated now? It'll stay that way until we hit T6 down. Once we hit T6 down, 10 goes off. That's how we've converted T6 from a momentary trigger to a binary trigger. Okay, now all that's left to do is arm attitude mode and then turn it on. So we arm attitude mode by bringing SD all the way down to 0.
Attitude mode armed.
There we go, it's armed. But notice attitude mode is not enabled on channel 6. Channel 6 still reads -100. Watch what happens when I pull the trigger now.
Attitude mode on.
Okay, so channel 6 now says 85%, 10 and 12 are both lit, and they'll stay that way until I change the position of SD or until I turn the trigger off with the T6 down. So here's turning it off with T6 down.
Attitude mode off.
There we go. Attitude mode is off, and channel 6 is back down to -100. I'm going to turn it back on now.
Attitude mode on.
And I'm going to use my SD switch to disable it.
Attitude mode off.
You see how channel 6 dropped all the way down to 0? Notice that logical switch 10 is still on though. The only way to turn that off is by pulling that switch down. That turns it off. You probably could bake other logic in there that says if SC and SD are both up, turn off logical 10. There might be a way to do that. I haven't fooled with it. I hope you enjoyed the video and found the information useful. If you did, a thumbs up and a share would be great. If not, leave me a thumbs down and tell me why. That's all I've got for today. Take it easy. So the first method I'm going to show you, the first method I'm going to show you is right, on the special functions tab, you can see that, all right,